Hey, thanks for joining us today. It's BJ,
I'm Patrick.
and we're back talking all things real estate. If you haven't, give us a like for the video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything because we are putting out a pile of content. We got a lot of content to talk about.
Oh, there's always with all these new updates and with real estate and affordable housing and
Election
elections,
results.
yeah, election results.
Election
So
results. We think there's an election. Well, we know there's an election coming up federally at some point here
in
in
2025, by the end of the
2025.
year,
Yeah.
sometime, if
Yeah.
not sooner, right? We'll
Yeah.
see what happens.
So,
Yeah, but this time we're going to talk about the Canada Revenue Agency.
okay.
So for all those folks, they've come down with a new ruling that's going to affect short-term rental property owners. So what they're saying is
Okay.
those properties that have been used for short-term rentals, such as Airbnb or VRBO or anything like that, um, they will have 13% HST. So according to the province, this will have the GST and PST portions applicable to the sale of the property. Now, I believe here, sort of like province by province, it's a little bit different. I think in BC, we'll only have the GST applicable to the sale of those properties.
Okay.
So that's how it is normally with commercial real estate, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's 8 things that we need to know if you are an owner of a short-term rental to be aware of when you're selling this. So the HST or GST is going to be applied to the sale price on short-term rental properties. Now, I've been saying this for years already. If you use your home in any sort of manner, I would be very careful and check with your tax accountant. If you're selling doilies on Etsy, but you're selling it out of your house, I would be checking with your accountant. Not to say your whole, like your entire home would be GST applicable on the sale,
Right.
but there might be a portion of it.
Sure.
So let's say, for example, you're using one room or a suite in the house that may occupy 10%, 20%, 30% of the house, then I think the GST portion will be applicable to that part.
Right.
Of course, if it was an entire condo, then it would be applicable to the whole amount.
Sure.
All right.
I think the thing to come back to on that too, if that's you and you're in that situation, it's always good to talk to a professional, right? So go see the accountant and get some input from the accountant. You may need to see a lawyer at some juncture of that as well. I have a client coming up that his property's coming up, and it's purpose built Airbnb. So
Yeah.
it's we've looked at it and said, okay, now in order to move forward, he needs to sit down with his tax accountant and find out how this gets navigated. And
Right. And I think this is a common thing happening where people have used a residential property, even if it was purpose built with suites in it, additional rooms that, it would be very usable as a short-term rental property. But now the use has been commercial, where now you have to go talk to CRA
right,
or the right professional to tell you if that applies or not. So that was the first one. Number 2,
okay,
status retained for long-term rentals. Properties rented for a long-term basis or for periods exceeding 28 days retain their classification as a residential and are exempt from the additional HST change. Long-term rentals meet the CRA's criteria for residential use, avoiding the HST that applies to short-term rental properties. I think this is just clarifying the difference between the two.
yeah,
That's pretty normal. Number 3, short-term rentals treated similarly to hotel businesses. CRA views short-term rentals as comparable to a hotel or lodging business since these rentals operate on a model similar to hotel. With high turnover and transient guests, these are now subject to HST in the same way as commercial lodging, which, many municipalities have put into effect a higher licensing fee, like because that residential property doesn't pay hotel tax
yeah,
or commercial tax,
right,
they try to make up for it somewhere in licensing fees or like a business license. Right. So this makes sense to me if it's like I'm going to use HST and GST a little bit interchangeably. GST is applicable to goods and services.
mm-hmm,
right? You know, when we charge for our real estate services, that's a service.
Sure.
It's always plus GST on top of that. So HST number 4, as a note, HST is due on short-term rental income as well. You should be collecting, if you're a short-term rental operator, if it's through Airbnb,
sure.
GST or HST, whatever applicable in that province, needs to be collected. And all right, so number 5, the court ruling reinforces standing law. Funny enough, although this is not new, the recent court decision highlights its enforceability after an owner attempted to dispute it. The ruling serves as a reminder that HST requirement has been on the books and is enforceable. It aligns with the government's goal to regulate short-term rentals and treat them akin to commercial operations. I think many people entered into this as thinking your customer of an Airbnb or short-term rental is a tenant,
Yeah.
and they are not your tenant. They
Right.
are your customer.
Customer.
If there was a dispute, you have to take it up in court.
Sure.
It does not go to the residential tenancy board.
So my question in this is, if you've been doing this for whatever period of time and you haven't been charging GST, now what?
Right. So you may come there might be some issues there. CRA, I'm not sure if this mentions here, we're going to get to this. If you haven't been doing it for years, it can come back to you. Number 6, capital gains tax increase add further costs. Now, of course, this the exemption to the capital gains tax on your primary residence is because it's a primary resident use.
Yeah.
Now, if it's a commercial use, that's not your primary residence and therefore doesn't have exemption. So number 6, in addition to the HST, short-term rental property sellers may also face increased capital gains taxes, another financial consideration for hosts. Together, these costs can substantially impact overall profitability from this sale. It's not that they would add an additional capital gains, it's you're losing the exemption for that portion
Yeah,
of the property,
sure.
if not all of it.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 7, this is going to get to your question. Time frame for CRA review and reassessment. CRA has a 4-year window from the date of assessment to reassessment on an HST return. However, in cases of gross negligence, like people not reporting it, right? Such as failing to report the sale of a real estate asset, the agency can extend their time frame beyond the typical 4-year period. So anyone out there, please be careful and
Right. If you're not sure, go talk to your accountant now. Don't wait for CRA to come knocking.
right, because it might be too late at that point where
Well-
you might have some severe penalties behind that as
Yeah,
well.
my accountant has always told me, think of it this way. They said it's always better if you're proactively talking to them versus the other way around. And you're going to get better results in general if you can be the first one.
In communication with
Yeah.
them, if
If
it's
there's something to communicate about.
Yeah. So for personal income tax returns, this review period is limited to 3 years. All right. And the last one is, like we've been saying this whole time, consult with an accountant before selling. I had an American citizen living down in Seattle, worked for a big company, had a vacation property here.
Yeah.
So there's even more to it. Like he wasn't using it as an Airbnb, but the first step was, because I know there's a withholding amount that CRA will withhold from the sale of the property,
So the property, yeah.
which could also hold up the sale.
Okay.
So if we have funds to extinguish from title,
Yeah.
like a mortgage,
Right.
and if the CRA can hold up to, if it was a rental property, up to 50%, that's a residential
Wow.
property.
Wow.
So it's usually 25%.
Yeah.
Normally.
Yeah.
And if it was a personal use, let's say you have a cottage up there in Lake Howichin or something
Yeah.
like that, and then because they're Americans, even though there's a foreign buyer ban, Americans are still allowed to buy vacation properties here.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So, but if it was treated as a rental, it could be up to 50%. Now, if the property is treated as commercial, this could be a whole different ball of wax.
Right. Sure.
So always, before considering selling a property in Canada, I would say in Canada,
Yeah.
especially if you're not a Canadian citizen, but if it was for a commercial purpose, but it's a residential property such as a short-term rental,
Yeah.
please talk to your accountant first.
Yeah, I think that's a good rule of thumb. And we're finding out that with a lot of these things the government is rolling out, I would say this, there's a couple of things that I get out of it. One, obviously they want to make sure they're getting their proverbial pound of flesh here.
Oh yeah.
The other is they are trying to, this is my opinion, they're trying to discourage the free market use and property rights that we have when it comes to homes and what we do with them and how we use them.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think I think there's a misunderstanding of property when people use a residential property for commercial purpose.
Sure.
That this is, like it said in my list here, like this isn't enforcing a new rule.
Right.
This is reinforcing an old rule,
Yeah.
basically. So I think a lot of people out there operate sort of in the gray.
In the gray. Yeah, for
You know,
sure.
I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
And it is what it is. I'm not the police.
Yeah.
I'm not CRA.
Yeah. And maybe I'm a little jaded because we've seen so much of that happening as far as the removal of property rights in British Columbia in the last year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah, David Eby has been quite,
Right?
you know, for the purpose of collectivism.
Right.
Yeah,
So-
for the benefit of the whole. Well, let's take away the rights of the few,
Yeah.
right? Even though everybody's been granted those rights already.
Yeah. So that's
Okay.
it for that episode.
We'll go a
Before
little
we
bit
get
sidetracked on that
Yeah, we're
one.
going to be in over our heads in a minute here. So we'll wrap it up there. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, and if you have some thoughts on what we've talked about, I mean, we're just reading and going over what the government is telling
Yeah,
us.
this is a new ruling, so
This
there
is
we
a
are.
new ruling. So what's your take on it? All right.
Thanks a lot.
See ya.